Hello and welcome to Doom Does DVD, and this is Disney Classics number 39, The Emperor's New Groove. But before we talk about that, we have to have a brief interlude where we talk about the Disney Classics series itself, also known as the Disney Animated Canon. At some point in the 80s, Disney started numbering all their films, mainly, it seems, for the purpose of marketing, so they could easily say things like, Disney's 58th animated feature coming to a theatre near you. And that seems like a simple, fairly nice idea, and it allows you to easily reference each of these films. However, unfortunately, this list of films is not standard throughout the world. There are some slight variations depending on your region. So if you're in the USA, you're probably expecting number 39 to be the film Dinosaur. But for some reason, in Europe, that's not considered a Disney classic. That's considered separate and is not included in this box set that I'm going through. So for the next few weeks, the numbers are going to be one off from what you might expect them to be. That is until we get to number 46 with The Wild, which is considered a European Disney classic, but isn't in the USA. And that's a bit of an odd one in that while it was, at least in Europe, distributed by Buena Vista, it wasn't made by Disney at all. And yet, if you're in Europe, it's considered one of the numbered Disney classics. Looking online though, I can find very little in terms of explanation as to why this is. So I can only presume it is just down to the weird intricacies of, international film distribution deals. It is boiling down to who's got the rights to show it in different countries. So yeah, although some of you might be expecting Dinosaur, we're going to have to skip that for now because that's not even included in this box set. Maybe I'll come back and look at that in the future because it's another one I've not seen, but it does sound kind of interesting because it's one of Disney's first really almost purely CG ones. But instead today we're talking about The Emperor's New Groove, a film which I haven't seen and don't know anything about really. I'm guessing based on the title that this is some kind of story based on the Emperor's new clothes, but I might be completely wrong with that. That's just what I feel like it is probably the case. And the only other things I know about this film come from memes. I know at some point someone called Kronk is going to be told to pull a lever, but who those people are, what the context is for these things, no clue. So I think we're just going to have to get on with watching it and find out. Well, that turned out to be a little bit different than I was expecting. I don't know if this makes sense exactly, but it kind of feels more like a cartoon than it does an animated feature. Like, it's a lot of slapstick comedy and sort of weird, unrealistic sound effects to go with motions, and weird Roadrunner style gravity and physics that don't make sense, like running off a cliff and not falling until you look down and realise you've run off a cliff. It feels like it's got more in common with Looney Tunes than it does with Disney. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely feels different. It also barely had any music, just an opening and closing number. Despite the current trend of trying to get someone fairly famous to do the songwriting, Sting in this case, it just didn't seem to really be used. Although I think in this case that's probably something more to do with the troubled production history. I briefly mentioned in the intro that I was guessing this was probably based on something like The Emperor's New Clothes, but it turns out that's not the case. Going back 6 years at Disney at this point, there's been a project sort of under development called Kingdom of the Sun, which as far as I can tell was kind of an original story, but with some basic Inca legend type stuff sort of integrated a bit. And so, Sting had been hired to do that on the back of Elton John having done so well with The Lion King, despite what's happened in the meantime. But for various reasons, that project seems to have come under all sorts of troubles about being too complicated and too convoluted. And after the low box office performance of Pocahontas and Hunchback of Notre Dame, they decided to basically completely change it. And so what we have here with The Emperor's New Groove is based on that story. And the only thing it seems to have in common with The Emperor's New Clothes is that there happens to be a central character who's an emperor who's also kind of vain. And for something that's got such a troubled history, they've managed to pull at least something reasonable out of it. It's not fantastic, but, it's enjoyable. Once I had sort of settled into the new styles and sort of got to know the characters a bit, I enjoyed it. But also, on the other hand, didn't find really a lot interesting to say about it, other than about its differences that I've already talked about. It's one of those where the hour and a half kind of went by and I didn't actually write down many notes about it. Because, it wasn't great, it wasn't terrible, so there wasn't really much to talk about. There was one little moment in the spa special features which amused me. There was a couple of minutes about computer use within the animation, and one of the computer modelers was kind of describing his job. He was mentioning how his job was there to be invisible. It wasn't supposed to look like it was done on computers. And the biggest compliment he could get was from people saying that they didn't notice it had been done on computers, and that if people did, then he had failed at his job. Which is, of course, the very first thing I noticed. The particular cart he's even talking about in this example was the first time I thought, hey, that's a computer model. So yeah, this one, some great voice performances and some nice animation, although it's definitely lacking in some spots. It's probably been done a bit on the cheap side in order to try and recoup some costs of the long development process. Not really any music worth mentioning. And the story, had some really nice moments, but also a little bit thin in other places. Which, put that all together and you get something that's, fairly middle of the road. What are your thoughts on this one? Tell me about those in the comments down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you again next week with Atlantis, the Lost Empire.